you can go back to 1996 and Sanajay Surya's masterclass, or you have close encounters like the one we saw in 2007, which I call Bopara Gate, considering how close Bopara took England across the line in 2000. Until Dilhara Fernando. He didn't overstep on that occasion, but got the pivotal wicket that got us through against England. All right, I am a tad baffled, and I'll tell you why I'm a tad baffled early on. I just we have with us. Sorry, guys. I've got a bit of feedback. Can I be heard? It's because we have Nicholas Brookes with us. When Merle and I started the show a couple of weeks ago, we set having Nicholas Brookes on board as a long-term target, as a long-term objective. But to see that it's been fast-tracked considerably is testament to Nick's humility and Nick's willingness to come on board. So Nick, thank you very much for coming on board. It's an honor and a privilege for us to have you with us on the Eye on Cricket, and we look forward to an engaging conversation.
Having me. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, big fan of the show and looking forward to chatting a bit about England and Sri Lanka.
Thanks, Nick. Well, I'll yield the floor to you.
Yeah, I'm not going to make Nick any more uncomfortable by like singing more praise, but like just for anybody who's been living under the rock. So Nicholas wrote, I don't think I can be seen given the blur I have, but like the book, the definitive book on Sri Lankan cricket history and Islands 11, which I have a copy in front of me right now. It charters everything about Sri Lankan cricket going back to its very origins from the plantation days, and him having come from England and spending time here and familiarizing himself with the game in Sri Lanka and with all its nuances, peculiarities, and frustrations and elations. I think he's done a wonderful job. He has so many more articles on ESPN Cricinfo as well. My favorite being the one about Sathasivam, and I really, really enjoyed it even before the book came about. Maybe we talk about that a little bit later. But like the reason we also wanted to have Nick on board today was to talk about the history of Sri Lanka versus England in World Cup. So Sri Lanka didn't play England in either 75 nor 79. But since 1983, Sri Lanka has played England 11 times, and we have a 5-6 record. Sri Lanka has won 5 times and England has won 6 times. And up to 1996, England won all of it. And after 1996, England won in 1999. So we are going to speak through this history through the lens of about 5 matches, starting from the very first match. So I'll start by setting the context for the very first match we are going to talk about. So this is 1983. Sri Lanka is fresh off gaining test status, and the spirits are high. And to add to those spirits is the fact that before going to England on the tour, Sri Lanka, if I'm not mistaken, Nick, wins 2 ODIs against Australia at home, and like the history of Sri Lanka in World Cups is also such that Sri Lanka, while they only won 1 encounter in 1979 against India, if I'm not mistaken, we've done a really good job at like not being intimidated by large totals. So Sri Lanka has given a spirited effort throughout like the prior showings in the World Cups, and they are on a somewhat high coming into like 1983. I think it's in Taunton. And England posts like 333 with a brilliant 100 by David Gower. And any other team, especially in that era, considering the run rates and not before the modern era of ODI cricket, any other team should be intimidated, but like not Sri Lanka, as we'll soon find out. Like Nick, like could you just maybe like give us a bit more to that context and what the Sri Lankan dressing room and like their spirits might have been coming into the tournament, and like what you found out like fascinating while you were researching this era and especially this tournament?
Oh, thank you for that incredible intro, Merle. It's far too kind of you. Yeah, this was a really interesting one. I mean, 3rd World Cup, first time these 2 sides had met. I think Sri Lanka came in on a bit of a high. As you said, they won some ODIs against Australia. I think they were a whisker away from winning that series, and they kind of lost one game on a countback method, which when I was Googling, I couldn't even find out exactly what it was. It was some weird old Duckworth-Lewis rule. But anyway, yeah, they'd also had some close ODIs with England the year before 1982, around the time of the first test. And also, I mean, I think another big factor coming into this World Cup was that Gary Sobers had just arrived in Sri Lanka as the coach, right? And he says in his autobiography, they were great players, you know, they all had wonderful techniques, and I couldn't really see what I was doing here. If there was one weakness, it was that they were a little bit gun shy against, you know, really fast bowling, and this early 80s era was kind of dominated by quicks. But, you know, all the guys said that Sobers, I remember in one of my interviews, I think with Ashanta Damel, said that he was a bit like a brand ambassador. And, you know, first two World Cups, no one had really given Sri Lanka too much time of day. It's like that sort of, what are these guys doing here? And suddenly having Sobers in their corner, everyone kind of wanted to be around Sri Lanka. There were like legends popping in and out of the dressing room. And he was constantly, apparently, you know, the whole World Cup, whenever they were on coach journeys, he was like, he'd stand up and tell stories the whole length of them and, you know, put everyone really at ease. He was bowling, I think, just sending down some spinners in the nets. And I actually was watching some clips of this game on YouTube last night. I don't know if you guys have seen this, and you can see Sobers with a little old school video recorder kind of like filming what's going on, which shows how much times have changed. But yeah, for all that Sri Lanka came into the tournament kind of on a high, feeling good. It was a rough start. I think they conceded 338 in their first game against Pakistan. And then what did they concede here? Was it 333 or 331?
333,
yeah. And I also found some footage of David Gower's innings, which was kind of, well, incongruous for me because, you know, I'm too young to remember Gower. I'm sure you guys are. But all the stories you hear of him being a kind of lyrical touch player, right? And there's some footage of him just kind of clubbing sixes over cow corner. I think he tore into Vinodan John, tore into Ashanta Damel. And yeah, it was the kind of innings that seemed like ahead of its time, the sort of thing that you expect Kevin Peterson to be doing. But yeah, I think Sri Lanka did pretty well not to lose heart, right? Chasing 333. And they went down, I think they were 17 for 2 at one stage. And I mean, then you had lots of little cameos from, I think Duleep got a 50. I think Arjuna put on some runs. Guy de Alwis made a nice 50 as well. And yeah, it showed. I mean, I think the total that Sri Lanka almost chased against Australia in 1975 was the record in a World Cup for a long time. And then I think they re-broke that either in, I think it was in 1987. So Sri Lanka, you know, through all those first World Cups, or maybe it was in 83 that they rebroke it, because 87 they had an absolute stinker in India. So, I mean, but Sri Lanka showed through those first World Cups, as you say, Merle, that they weren't daunted by big totals. And, you know, through those first years, I know they didn't win a huge amount of ODIs, but they had good batters. And in this tournament, I mean, again, it shows a lot that they didn't lose heart after those first two games, and they came back to beat New Zealand, should have beaten Pakistan, and, you know, they were really starting to build something. Also, something that just came to me about this game was, do you guys know the story about Sid Wetamuni's 6?
In Lords?
Here at Taunton, I believe, if I'm right, that it was the only 6 he hit throughout his whole international career. And he's got a clip with talking about it with Rex. And
yeah, is this the one to do with his girlfriend or wife back then? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, his girlfriend, I think, who became his wife, came and he sort of like said to her before, "I'm going to hit a 6 because you're here," and then he did it, and it was the only time he did it in international cricket.
And yeah, I mean, not even just this match. So I was looking through the scorecard of like the first match between Sri Lanka and Pakistan as well. So Pakistan posts 338 for 5, but even then Sri Lanka ends up with 288 for 9 and loses that match by only about like 50 runs. So Sri Lanka has had like building a habit of like not giving up easily. And I think like key to at least a part of that effort and like the way Sri Lanka went about things for me is Dulip Mendis and the absolute bludgeoning that he used to unleash. Like I mean, for me, the greatest discovery, like reading your book, was like digging up old Dulip Mendis clips after reading how just like, I mean, murderous he could be. Like, could you speak to like a Dulip Mendis a little bit? I know like you have things to say about Dulip.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought him up, Mel, because I was going to say the same thing. I think Duleep is one of my favorite Sri Lankan cricketers of all time, and such an elemental, brutal batter. And I mean, probably most famously is those sixes that he hit at Lords in '84, right, where there was just like he was just pulling everyone. And there was another kind of pulled hook here that I went into the stands that really reminded me of that innings. And I think you're right. He the way he went about things and his fearlessness, I think it must have seeped down through the rest of the side. And I credited Arjuna a lot in my book as being the kind of captain who got people in Sri Lanka to kind of play their own way and embrace their own style. But I think Duleep was doing it a little bit before Arjuna. And, you know, I always remember David Hines saying to me, the greatest thing about Duleep was that he had no fear. And, you know, it seems just totally true, right? He'd just go out swinging like a woodcutter. And I think he had a lot of respect from the whole of international cricket, from the way he went about his business. And, you know, you would never call it classical. Some people might call it ugly, but I think there's a kind of beauty in his brutality.
And to
Sorry,
continue.
just a quick addition there. I want to kind of bring in an honorary mention for Dulip Mendis linked to his coaching philosophy as well. We spoke about Gary Sobers being the one who brought Sri Lankan cricket onto the map in terms of his coaching philosophy. Dulip Mendis has done the same thing with Oman over the past 5-6 years, bringing Oman onto the map and making them a force to be reckoned with. And Nick, just a quick follow-up question there. It's interesting that you highlighted Dulip Mendis to kind of be the architect of revolutionizing batting for Sri Lanka. I want to highlight another name on that list that we showed earlier, linked to the 1983 game, Ashanta Dimel. I know many Sri Lankan fans associate him as the national selector who got it all wrong, but he had an illustrious playing career back in the day. And I put up a trivia post yesterday, and I was quite surprised to know that he's the one who's taken 2 World Cup hat tricks for Sri Lanka and holds the record for the most number of hat tricks. So, quick mention on his bowling prowess as well, if possible.
Yeah, I think he was a fantastic new ball bowler. And I mean, I think you see it in a lot of Sri Lanka's early tests that he'd always get wickets up front. And, you know, it's one of those unfortunate things that he should have had a much longer career, but it was scuppered by injuries. And as Sri Lankan cricket was in those days, there just wasn't the medical treatment. I think he had a pretty kind of solvable injury, but because there wasn't, you know, much modern medicine going around, he ended up, I think he was done by the time he was 27. But yeah, I think this 83 World Cup is probably the zenith of his career, right? Because he was the joint highest wicket taker with Roger Binny, is that right? And he should have been credited as the number 1 wicket taker. I think one of his wickets, possibly in this game, was attributed to Rumesh, maybe. And no, he was a real, I think he was a kind of warrior cricketer who could swing the new ball. He could bowl at pace. He had a sharp bouncer and he was clever. And yeah, I think he led this attack. And I actually think that this Sri Lankan seam attack in the 80s was really good, and that they were kind of hamstrung, if anything, by the lack of a really quality spinner. I mean, they had DS there, but I think he was already pushing 40 by this time. He, you know, was one of those guys who Test cricket arrived for him while he was when he was 37. But I think if this team had a really good spinner, it's always sad to me that Ajit De Silva was kind of lost to the Rebel Tour because he was someone classical left armer who could get turn and bounce. But yeah, I think if Sri Lanka had a good spinner during the 80s, they would have done a lot more in white ball and red ball cricket.
Now we want to fast forward a little bit while continuing the theme of brutality, perhaps, and bring us all the way up to 1996 to the encounter against against England. And I posted a video this morning, and perhaps arguably the single most, I know we saw Kusal Mendes, but like for me still remains as the most brutal counterattack of by Sanath, who actually revolutionized the game back in 1995 and 1996. And I'm going to hand it over to Viren to set the context and just like paint the picture of like what that setup and the actual match looked like, and let's take it from there.
As a Sri Lankan fan, I'll take great pride in setting the context up for this, because prior to this quarterfinal against England, Sri Lanka cricket was considered, the Sri Lankan team was considered minnows, right? It seemed to have, we had a series of events that led us to qualifying to the quarterfinals even before playing a single game. It was unfortunate that Australia and West Indies refused to tour Sri Lanka for our 2 group stage encounters. So we had already had 2 walkovers / 2 byes by the time we played our first game in the 1996 World Cup. So by the time we reached the quarterfinals, I'm quite sure that the other 7 teams that progressed took us quite lightly. We were the underdogs. We weren't meant to be in the quarterfinals. We had never reached past the group stage of any World Cup prior to 1996. And it's safe to say that there might have been some complacency. And I'm not just referring to the English team in the quarters. I'm also potentially referring to this Indian team in the semi-finals as well, before Arvinder's masterclass, which we'll get to on another show. But in that particular quarterfinal, and this is something that I found quite interesting, right? You'd expect a team playing their very first knockout game at a World Cup to succumb to some pressure. And England posted 235, which is considered a middling total nowadays. But back in 1996, against a side that you didn't really quite fancy, being Sri Lanka, leading up to the tournament, I'm pretty sure England thought that they had the advantage going into that mid-innings break. And then we have the partnership. I would call this the partnership that defined Sri Lanka cricket / the turning point in Sri Lanka cricket. And that was that second wicket partnership between Sanath Jayasuriya and Asanka Gurusinghe. If you find cricketers on 2 ends of the spectrum, that was the perfect definition of it, right? Asanka Gurusinghe on one end and Sanath Jayasuriya on the other. Nicholas, I want to get your take on this. Sanath Jayasuriya's knock of 82 or 44. You've seen cameos at the top. You've seen people defining bashing during the power play, etc. But was it this game that brought Sri Lanka cricket onto the map as a force to be reckoned with? And was it that particular innings of Sanath that could be termed as being a turning point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I love that clip that you posted earlier, Merle. It's one of my favorites because I don't know if you guys have heard this, but Jeffrey Boycott's on commentary, right? And he says something like, they don't like running much this lot. And then as soon as he says it, Sanath hits that huge straight 6 onto the roof. And just a fantastic moment. But yeah, I think this was Sanath's crowning innings throughout the tournament. I think Sri Lanka handled pressure superbly throughout the whole of the 96 World Cup. And although they had an easier group stage with West Indies and Australia not coming to Sri Lanka, they went to India, right? I think they went to Delhi and chased 270 down against India, which was a huge moment and I think gave them a lot of confidence. And this cameo from Jayasuriya was just outrageous because he gets out in the 13th over, 14th over, and Sri Lanka have already got 115 or somewhere around that on the board. And you think they're chasing 230 or they've got 37 overs to get that with the batting depth. I mean, the game's already over, right? And yeah, it was just such a brutal innings. I think they start off England. I think they were probably slightly getting aware of the Jayasuriya threat and they don't bowl anything wide to him early, I think, if I'm remembering this right. And he hits a lot of boundaries through the leg side. And then he seems to be kind of going through the gears and just really opens up. It's a slight shame. Something I'd forgotten until I was reviewing this game recently was that Dermot Reeve actually bowls him off a no ball, right? The ball before he's eventually out. And you think that with that second chance, he's going to go on and bludgeon 150 and then he gets out next ball. So as much as it's one of the great Lankan innings of all time, I wish it had lasted a little bit longer and that he batted another 5 overs. And I feel like the way he was going, it was starting to look like everything was going for six. And then this is the source of another funny Wetamuni story, right? Because I'm sure you guys know this one of the watch where he said, I'll give you a brand new Longines watch if you bat 15 overs, and Sanath gets out just short and then is like absolutely gutted that he's not going to get the watch, and Wetamuni gives it to him anyway. And yeah, I think that story again shows the kind of spirit that there was around the squad, that as much as this was a huge tournament for Sri Lanka and their coming out party to the world, somehow they managed to just stay calm, keep level-headed, and performed incredibly throughout. But yeah, this England match, I think Aravinda said that he started to believe that if they beat England, they'd go all the way. And I think a lot of people kind of felt that once they'd beaten England, once they were through to the semis, that there was a real chance of Sri Lanka lifting the trophy.
Yeah.
And I think like this inning also kept like a series of 3 innings, starting from the India match where Sanath scored, I think, 70 odd, and he scored a quick fire 42 or 43 against Kenya. And this was like the final nail in the coffin in terms of the man of the series race. Yes, because the man of the series was determined, if I'm not mistaken, either before the semi-final or before the final. And like had the entire tournament been considered, Aravinda would probably have emerged like the man of the series, and perhaps deservedly so. But like this was the turning point, like in terms of that decision as well. Yes, Nick?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think you're right, Merle. I agree with you that if the player of the tournament was named after the final, as I guess you'd say it should be, that Aravinda probably would have won the award. But I don't think anyone can begrudge Sanath that trophy, right? Because, I've seen people complaining and saying, other people scored twice as many runs across the tournament. But he really did change the way the world thought about opening batting in the power play, and it was just so brutal. And yeah, I mean, it was a real springboard for him as well, right? Because I know he'd done it a little bit in Australia around the turn of the year, but before that, not too many people in world cricket knew the name Sanath Jayasuriya. And then he went on to have just like the most sensational couple of years and was a huge asset for Sri Lankan cricket in ODIs. I feel that almost in that era, as influential as Murali was in tests, Sanath was kind of as influential in ODIs.
I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, Nick. And I'm pretty sure Sri Lankan fans will forgive me for going on a tangent linked to the 1996 World Cup. I want to speak about an unsung hero, someone I'd consider to be an underrated hero in Sri Lankan cricket, and that's our number 3, Asanka Gurusinghe. Because if you even look at the scorecard, everyone else in the top 5 had a strike rate in excess of 100. But it was Asanka Gurusinghe's stability at number 3 that allowed the likes of Sanath Jayasuriya and Aravinda De Silva to play their natural games early on. Any mention for Asanka's prowess, Nick? And how would you rate his performances throughout the World Cup?
Oh, I think he was a huge part of that team and a huge cog in Sri Lanka winning the World Cup. And I think you're totally right to say that he's unsung, Viren. And a lot of, I think, cricket fans nowadays don't even know the name of Asanka Gurusinghe. But I'm pretty sure he averaged close to 50 in that tournament. And I think he was a terrible runner between the wickets, is what I would say. I think he was run out 3 times out of, 6 innings or 6 outs. But I mean, yeah, it always sticks with me that Arjuna sort of described him as the Rock and said, you just stay and do your thing. And he really did that. But he could also open up, and he hit the ball really hard. You see, looking back, I think it's the Kenya game where he gets a big 100 and he starts to kind of club sixes towards the end of that innings. But it says a lot for Gurusinghe that he was, for so much of his career, willing to kind of limit or sacrifice those attacking impulses in order to do what he needed to do for the team. And, he played some crucial knocks throughout the tournament. Again, in the final, he had a really good little cameo, which I think by the time Arjuna got to the crease, there was still work to do, but Gurusinghe had done a fair bit of the hard work. And yeah, I mean, great unsung hero for Sri Lankan cricket. Real shame that he left the game as early as he did, because I feel like he had more to give.
So from the highs of Faisalabad, now we are going to go to the lows of Lords. So in 1999, Sri Lanka starts the campaign like in the first match against England, which turns out to be one of the more feeble defenses of a World Cup, like in the history of World Cups. But like before we get to the actual match, I also want to talk a bit about the setup and what the events leading up to that. So Sri Lanka is after what Nick calls the third public hanging of Murali. So Sri Lanka eventually ended up winning that match against England in Australia due to the brilliance of Mahela, who interestingly was not included in the Lord's match, and that created some controversy as well. And even the tri-series leading up to the first match, Sri Lanka didn't have Sanath and Murali in that series, and Sri Lanka was struggling to find balance. And Sri Lanka was, I mean, is it fair to say things are in a bit of disarray like during this period, Nick?
Yeah, totally. I think that's completely fair, Merle. It actually reminds me a bit of England's current campaign, defending champions who have failed to evolve over the next 4-year cycle and kind of come unstuck at the tournament. But yeah, I think Sri Lanka were kind of pretty all over the place going into 99. That match that you referenced against England and Australia, I think that they hadn't won in that tri-series for a good few games before that, and kind of Murali being no-balled sort of got their backs up and they suddenly started to play some cricket. But yeah, leading into 1999, I mean, everything was going wrong. I think there was a pretty muddled coaching setup with lots of guys involved, a bit of a too many cooks situation. And I think the attitude was probably from the selectors that we just rinse and repeat what we did in 96. So they didn't really adjust to the conditions at all. They picked, I think, 3 seamers for the tournament. It was just Vas, Wickramasinghe and Upashanta, if I'm not mistaken. And whereas every other team had 6 or 7 seam bowlers in their squad, early summer, England, Duke's ball, it's going to be different to a tournament in Asia. And I think Sri Lanka failed to adapt. And I told us the story in my book that Mahela told me, which you guys might know, that on the eve of the match, they were having a team meeting and Mahela was, very much the youngster in the squad. And he said, I think we've picked the wrong combination. It's going to be overcast and you're going with 2 seamers. Like what's going on? And, I think all the kind of senior voices left the room, and Vas and Murali just sort of looked at him and, made that kind of face. And he was like, oh shit, what have I done? But obviously it struck a chord because they changed the combination. They added Upashanta to the team, who I don't think people had kind of expected to play. But as it turned out, it didn't really matter. I think that Sri Lanka, did Sri Lanka bowl first in this game?
Sri Lanka batted first.
Sri Lanka batted first. And I think it was rainy and overcast when they batted. And then as soon as England came out to bat, the skies cleared and the sun came out. And middling total, wasn't it 230 odd? I think it was.
And I want to spend a little bit of time on the Sri Lankan innings. So the left-arm pacer who made the most of the conditions was not Eric Upashanta, but Alan Mulally. So Alan Mulally might not be a familiar name to modern Sri Lankan cricket fans, but I was looking him up, and in 1999, and for a good period of about 18 months, he was ranked top 5 in the world. And Alan Mulally just exploited the conditions. He got the ball moving, and I was watching some highlights yesterday. He made the top order really uncomfortable. So Sanath Jayasuriya, even though he made a good start, nicked. Aravinda De Silva nicked. The only player who ended up showing some resistance, and this might be a surprise for you, some of our listeners. So Romesh Kalutharana's only World Cup 50 comes in this inning. So he comes and puts a resistance with Arjuna, and he scores 57 of 73, and he gets 7 boundaries. So I mean, one of the things that Sri Lankans fondly remember, or the myth of I wouldn't call it necessarily the myth, but the entire story and the aura of the Sanath Kalutharana combination, I think, was purely built on that Indian game. But the highest score of Kalutharana comes in this game, and had it not been for that inning, I think Sri Lanka would have really struggled.
Yeah, totally. And it came with Kalu batting down the order at 7, which was another thing which kind of exposed Sri Lanka's indecision, I think, at this tournament, was that they couldn't figure out whether to open or to partner Sanath with Roshan Mahanama or with Kalu. And they kept kind of flipping between the two. And I think they were really torn as to whether, like, do we go out and play the game that we've gotten famous for and become world champions doing, or do we try and respect the bowling and build a platform? And they kind of got stuck between the two stools and didn't end up doing either. But yeah, this was an important innings from Kalu. And, you know, the whole tournament was kind of a story of Sri Lanka, well, not even being dug out of trouble, but managing to salvage a bit of respect through unexpected innings. I think the top score across the whole tournament by Sri Lankan was from Vas. And yeah, Sanath had a bad time. Aravinda had a bad time. I think they both averaged in the teens. And the bowling never really clicked, right? I mean, Mahela was bowled into the ground, which might sound strange to some of our younger listeners, the fact that Mahela was there bowling seamers, bowling 10 overs in every game. They refused to play Hatrasingha. And I think the game which kind of like really summed up that they got it wrong was against South Africa, where they kind of had South Africa on the ropes 4 or 5 down and then didn't have enough seamers to kind of carry on. And they ended up, I think Klusner went and got them up to a score which was way too big for Sri Lanka. But yeah, the India game, which I think was again at Taunton, India-Sri Lanka, I was really feeling echoes of that during South Africa-England on Saturday.
I mean, I keep telling this to Viren, the Taunton 1990 game is the first cricket game from which I have PTSD. I remember watching this game on a small black and white TV, I think like a 13-inch black and white TV. And I watched like every single delivery, and watching Rahul Dravid and Ganguly just, I mean, words can't describe the carnage. So I think we will not spend any more time in 1999.
And just a quick point about 1999, and I want to draw parallels to what Nick said about weak title defenses. If you look at our opening partnership of Sanath and Roshan Mahanama, which was a change from a title-winning partnership of Ramesh with Sanath in 96, it's the same predicament that England faces now. You'd expect Roy and Bairstow to kind of stick around for 2023 as well, but they've tweaked things up a bit. Promoted Milan up the order to partner up with Best. And I think I completely agree with Nick. I think England too are caught in no man's land with not knowing what brand of cricket would be successful in Indian conditions. So I hope we can exploit that on Thursday. But referring back to Alan Mulali, the last blonde left-arm fast bowler that caused Sri Lanka nightmares was Nathan Bracken in 2007. But it's nice to know that we have a history with left-arm fast bowlers who caused us some chaos at World Cups. So back to you.
So the script flips in 2011. Yes, Viren, do you want to take us through what happened?
Sure. And I was fortunate enough to watch this live at the R. Premadasa Stadium. It was the quarterfinal yet again. And this time, Sri Lanka went into it as favourites. I'm going to make a controversial comment here, but I think it is a popular take. I think our 2011 World Cup squad on paper was the most balanced Sri Lankan cricket team we've had at World Cups. And the reason I make that claim is because when it came to role fulfillment, I think each and every player knew what their responsibility was. You take the likes of Tisra Pereira and Nuwan Kulasekara with the bat. They knew that their roles were as finishers, and moving forward to the final in 2011, those two partnerships with Mahela Jayawardena set us up for that 275 total that we ended up getting. But moving back to this game against England, it was a weird one at that because we were very sloppy in the field. There were quite a few missed drop catches, and I still remember all of us thinking, oh no, here we go again, another World Cup knockout exit. But then I want to set this up with another brilliant partnership, and a partnership that is a tad underrated when you take the history of opening partnerships at World Cups. Given the circumstances, given the pressure we were in, it was a home World Cup quarterfinal. Tilakaratne Dilshan and Upul Taranga single-handedly kind of took the chase by storm and got us over the line with a 10-wicket victory. And never have I seen the English side look so out of place, disoriented as they were in the field under Strauss's leadership that evening. And Nick, I want to bring you in here because I think this was my first question to you, because this was the last World Cup that was played in the subcontinent. Sri Lanka front-loaded on our spinners. If I'm not mistaken, in that quarterfinal game, we played Rangana Herath, Muttaya Muridharan, and we also had, if I'm not mistaken, we played Ajanta Mendis as a third spinner in that quarterfinal. My suggestion to you, looking ahead to this game on Thursday, which we'll get to later on, is it a case of testing your strengths? Is it a case of backing your strengths and pushing through on front-loading spinners against England in these conditions? Because if I'm not mistaken, England just had Graham Swan and James Treadwell on the other side. So just a quick question on strategy against England in these conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Sri Lanka opened the bowling with Dilshan as well. So they had like four frontline spinners pretty much. I think it can work in these conditions. The one thing I'd say about this game coming up on Thursday is it's at the Chinnaswamy, right? Yeah, which is a small ground and usually quite a flat pitch. So I think that they've got to take a judgment call on that, looking at the pitch. But I think, if it was at the Premadasa, that would certainly be the strategy that I would go for. And I'm really hoping Tikshana can be fit for Thursday, because a lot of the England players won't have seen that much of him, and I think he can be a kind of X factor if he's fit and firing. But yeah, I won't go too much into 2023 just yet, because I know we're going to talk about that later. But yeah, what a day this was. The Premadasa was rocking, right? And I mean, as you say, Viren, Sri Lanka was sloppy in the field, and I think England putting up 229 were pretty happy with that at the end of their innings. I remember there was a stat that I don't think anyone had chased more than 230 at the Premadasa for something like 12 years going into this game. But the pitch had been relayed, and so it was kind of, there was something new going on there. And Dilshan and Tharanga just made such light work of it. I seem to remember they were pretty circumspect through the first 5 or so overs, right? And they survived a tough opening spell from, I guess it would have been, who was it? Bresnan and Swan at the other end. So England opened the bowling with a spinner too. But once they got through that sort of new ball period, it was just the boundaries were flying, weren't they? And they won with over 10 overs to spare. I seem to remember there was enough time for Dilshan to kind of shepherd Tharanga through to his 100. And yeah, England were just completely blown away. And you're right, it was again another one of those games where, as in 96, from really early on in the chase, from that 15-20 over mark, you just think there's no way Sri Lanka are losing this. And definitely England's heads dropped. And I totally agree with you, Viren, that 2011 side was just about as good as anything Sri Lanka have put forth at a World Cup. Really well balanced, able to attack in all areas, really clear roles, deep batting, lots of bowling options. That was a hell of a side.
I'm going to ask you a question, Nick. This might be a bit of a tricky one to answer. If you had to compare our two opening partnerships in 2007 and 2011, Sanath and Tharanga in 07 with Dilshan and Tharanga in 2011, it's two different templates that we were trying to follow. And the one thing that I give Dilshan and Tharanga, and I think the thing that benefited them, was this left-right combination at the top, which I think kind of changed things up for bowling attacks who were up against us. My question to you, Nick, is that the type of consistency we need when you take World Cup cycles into account? Yes, you might have retirements. Yes, you might have players calling it a day. But having that ready-made replacement, as you said, with Dilshan moving up from being a middle-order batsman or being a finisher to enjoying his role at the top in 2008, 2009, following making that transition, is that the necessary ingredient for consistency at World Cups?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you want to have your combination at the top kind of settled a long way before the World Cup. And that's something that Sri Lanka haven't really done this time, with Dimwith coming in and coming out. I mean, I think in 2011, Tharanga and Dilshan were the best opening pair in the tournament, right? As you say, Viren, I think that left-right hand really benefited things. And I seem to remember in 2007, Tharanga started well, and then towards the end of the tournament, he was a little bit run shy, and there were even maybe talks of Atupatu coming in to replace him. But yeah, in 2011, they were firing, and, on paper, I like Pathum and KJP. You could say there's something similar going on there. Pathum's a right-hander who's, He's not the most explosive opening batter in the world, but you hope that he can play a kind of anchoring role. And KJP, I mean, I know the form hasn't been there yet through this tournament, but he's a more combustive short left-hander. And I mean, you'd think that if things are going well, those two could work well together. I mean, it's really early to say to look forward to 2027, but I'd like to see Sri Lanka investing in Chevron Daniel and Kruspule as a potential opening partnership. They opened a bit together in the LPL, right? And they both look really exciting, dynamic batters who can, do what Sri Lanka haven't done of late and get them off to a start where you think we can really build to a 350 plus score. So, I mean, I'm no selector, but I would like to see them giving those guys plenty of opportunities over the next few years.
Viren, I'm going to let you take us to 2019, but before we do, I think we would be amiss if we do not bring an absolute favorite of the show and spend a little bit more time with him. That is Tilkaratne Dilshan. So Dilshan, like you said, within a three-prong amazing spin attack, there versus plays for Dilshan, and Dilshan, I think, is the ultimate utility player. And we were doing a snake draft of all-time greatest 11 World ODI 11s, and I forced Dilshan into that squad because I think in any era, under any conditions, he would have a role to play. He's an ultimate utility player, was an amazing success story of Sri Lankan cricket, and I would would like you to just riff about Dilshan and just wax lyrical.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Merle. I mean, he is the everything man. I don't think there have been too many guys in the history of white ball cricket, right, who've opened the bowling with loads of success, opened the batting with so much success, kept wicket, and been one of the best fielders, in any given side. I mean, he's superb. And I know we've spoken about this before, Merle, right, that during that 2009-2010 period, I think he scored more ODI hundreds than Sangha and Mahela put together. And I often feel that, playing alongside two such colossuses, that Dilshan gets lost, right? And we haven't even mentioned the Dil Scoop, which is, one of the things that, I mean, he played it differently to everyone else, but that was kind of the start of batters thinking 360. And now you can't really be a successful white ball batter, especially in T20 cricket, unless you've got a shot over there somewhere. And so you can talk about him as being one of those guys who's brought about an innovation which has genuinely changed the way that cricket was played. No, I think he's just a fantastic cricketer in all those facets. And the fact that they had him taking the new ball here when you've got three other quality spinners on show shows how highly he was rated within the setup, right?
And a genuine all-rounder at that too, right? And I think if you take his purple patch from 2008/2009 all the way up until 2015, as Merle and Nick said, he was the utility player. I have a take where I think Dhananjay De Silva, if utilized correctly, could have been that utility player for Sri Lanka. But I mean, let's have a discussion on selection blunders and the lack of role fulfillment later on. But Dhananjay De Silva and 2019 World Cup against England, let's draw that link there. Dhananjay De Silva, when he was selected, he would have, under his purview, he was selected as a batsman, as a middle order batsman who'd bowl a couple of overs. But because of how great our selection process was leading up to 2019, where we recall Jeevan Mendis and Jeffrey Van der Steen out of thin air, Dhananjay De Silva was tasked with the unenviable responsibility of being our sole lead spinner against England in that game at the 2019 World Cup. And it was his spell, in my opinion, that changed the dynamics of that game and changed the dynamics of England's run chase. He broke the spine of the English middle order and also and credit to Kusal Janik Pereira for some excellent wicket keeping as well. But it was great to see DDS stepping up there, setting the context up for the 2019 World Cup game. And I don't think it's very different to the build-up to this 2023 encounter as well. Sri Lanka, the clear underdogs, England, the clear favourites. I think the only difference here is that it was England's loss to Sri Lanka in 2019 that set them on that bad run in the tournament. Whereas here they come in with some poor form behind them, needing to win this encounter to remain relevant in 2023. I think that is the only decisive factor that differentiates both these encounters. And another thing to note, right, is Lassit Malinga was close to his heyday. He was at the sunset of his career. He had passed his prime, but he was still spearheading our attack. We had once again brought back Dimut Karunaratne into the fray, appointed him as captain in the run-up to the 2019 World Cup, tasked him with that responsibility at the top. So there are quite a few parallels and quite a few links to our selections in 2023. But Nick, I'm coming to you here. I still remember this image. It's still a vivid memory. Just as we got Johnny Bairstow out early on, the win predictor popped up on Sky's Cricket, with England having a 99% win probability and Sri Lanka just having a 1% chance of winning that game. My question to you is, we all speak about Lassit Malinga's involvement at World Cups, and we speak about his prowess in 2007, his prowess in 2011, his brilliance in 2015 as well. But I don't think, given the circumstances, I don't think people credit him enough for his performances in 2019. I'm referring to that game against England and also that game against Afghanistan after a typical Sri Lankan collapse where he kind of brought the game back into Sri Lanka's domain. So a quick word on Lassit Malinga's performance plus Sri Lanka's comeback in the 2019 game against England.
Yeah, Malinga was great, wasn't he, in 2019? And I think, it was one of those things where he'd been in and out of the side, hadn't he, in the years before? And I remember some of my friends in England being like, what the hell's going on? Malinga's still playing. But he led the attack and he was, so crucial here in this game. He picked up wickets at really important moments. I think, defending 230, you've got to take early wickets, right? And for him to get Bairstow first ball and then to get Vince was just, that really set the tone. And, I've got to credit the fielding in this game against England as well, because I remember Kusal Mendes taking a really good slip catch. Isuru took a great caught and bowled, and then KJP took a really nice catch down the leg side. I think it was to get rid of Root.
Yes.
Which was the crucial wicket at the crucial time, right? Because if you look at that stage of the game, I think England were, 127 for 3. And, given what they were chasing, I think it felt like Sri Lanka pulled off a bit of a heist, didn't it? Because I think, 99% win viz was obviously insulting. And it should have been closer than that. But I think you felt throughout the whole of the chase that England kind of had it under control. And as you say, Varun, Dhananjaya came in and just, bowled a crucial spell. And I thought he was really superb throughout the 2019 tournament. I thought he was one of Sri Lanka's best bowlers, actually. But yeah, to get, Ali, I think, was it Ali and Wokes, he got in really quick succession, and that just kind of turned the game on its head. But still, even then, with Ben Stokes at the wicket, I had forgotten until I went to review this game that Stokes was left stranded, not out on 82, was it? And so many times in the past few years, we've seen Ben Stokes guiding England to victories in these kind of situations. And it was, an incredible heist for Sri Lanka. So it was a great day. There were some great performances. I still feel that this is kind of the Avishka Fernando innings, which sticks out for people. And whenever people are talking about, Avishka Fernando's potential, they come back to this game because the way that he played Jofra Archer through the power play was really impressive. And you just, watched it, and some of those shots, you thought there's a real player here. And it was, one of Angelo's last great days in the ODI side, right? He was really slow to get going. I remember him being, I think, kind of like 20 or 50, but hung around, dug in and accelerated and got Sri Lanka up to a total. And who knows, we might be seeing something similar on Thursday.
I was just about to say it would be befitting for him to make his grand comeback into World Cup cricket with a brilliant innings and the Chinnaswamy on Thursday. Nick, my final question linked to this game before we look ahead to the encounter on Thursday is linked to Avishka Fernando's knock at number 3, right? During that World Cup, we as the Sri Lankan cricket team were struggling to find our groove and to stamp our authority on the game. And this happened throughout our campaign. I remember I recall Dimut Karunaratne and Kusal Janit's brilliant partnership against Australia, followed by a typical middle order collapse. But focusing on this particular innings, I still remember that hoik of Jofra Archer, which kind of cemented Avishka Fernando's legacy as someone to look out for. And I'm glad he went on to convert and scored a century against West Indies during one of our final games in the campaign. My question to you, Nick, is you have players who step up to the occasion. We've spoken about Aravinda, we've spoken about Dilip Mendis, we've spoken about Sanat. Does it take a different type of cricket, or does it take a different type of mentality to be able to step up as a youngster and perform at the bigger stage? And if so, does Avishka Fernando deserve a lot more credit than he does get for this cameo of 49 against England?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right to talk about mentality, Viren, right? Because that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? When you're on the big stage in a game like this, the pressure that these cricketers must be feeling is indescribable. And certainly, I think that this innings was testament to Avishka Fernando's big game mentality. And, you know, it's a shame that he hasn't kicked on in the way that many of us, all of us, I guess, hoped that he would. And you probably say that his career's been maybe mismanaged slightly over the past 4 years. There've been injuries as well, which haven't helped. But yeah, I think this innings gave a real glimpse of what he can do. And, you know, he's still only 25. So here's hoping that, you know, he's going to build on this potential and that we're going to see him playing more kind of game-changing innings for Sri Lanka moving forward.
Before we get to Thursday's game, Viren, I'm going to spend a minute just ranting about, I think, the general frustration. I hope I echo the frustration of the Sri Lankan fan when I do this. Is like in the past, so like Sri Lanka has never succeeded because of the system necessarily, because of the management of Sri Lanka cricket or like the surrounding governing bodies. Sri Lanka has always succeeded like in spite of that system, through individual players, through characters, through personalities who persevered, who wanted to make a point. I think this is where like sometimes I kind of understand Sri Lankan fans, even though they can get a little bit toxic at times, just being frustrated about the current lot. The players not seeming to care enough. Yes, like some of it has to do with the evolving nature of the game and how the players are not being managed. And just speaking of just the sheer audacity of just disregarding the quality of bowling attacks, and the Avishka 6 of Jofra reminded me of Asela Gunaratne 6 of Bumrah in 2017. So Sri Lankans have never shied away from the spotlight or the quality of the opposition. I'm not even going to ask a question necessarily, but I think Sri Lankan fans would really like the players themselves to maybe show a little more fight, consistently, not in patches and little purple patches here and there, but hopefully we see a turnaround on Thursday. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rain to set the context.
Perfect. So we've had an exclusive focus on Sri Lanka thus far, but I want to kind of switch over and kind of have a bit of emphasis on England's run thus far. Nick, my question to you boils down to England's build up to this 2023 World Cup. There's been a lot of debate domestically about the emphasis given on the 100, the emphasis given on the other formats of the game, but the lack of emphasis on ODI cricket and the shambles that is the Royal London Cup, the One Day Cup that's squeezed into the calendar just to kind of accommodate it and tick it off the list. My question to you is, as defending champions, so looking back at the previous cycle, immediately after the shambolic display in 2015, Morgan and the ECB came together, sat down and developed a strategy for 2019. Once they won the World Cup in 2019, once they had attained the ultimate goal, do you think there was a bit of complacency there to not look forward to try and defend their title in India in 2023?
Yeah, I think there was definitely complacency there, Viren. And I think there's also been, I think all of us are guilty of this, that we've kind of gone into the mentality of you don't need to play 50 overs. It's just like T20, but a bit longer. And, you know, I was kind of thinking that I'd sort of forgotten the nuances of ODI cricket until it came to the build up to this tournament, and you start to watch more of it and you see that it really is quite a different game to T20. And I think you're right to touch on the Royal London Cup, because the situation going on at the moment in England is absurd, where you've got the T20 Blast and then another kind of franchise, not quite T20 tournament, the 100, which runs alongside England's only 50 over domestic competition. So you've got all the best players going into the 100 and not playing any 50 over cricket. I mean, you know, how do you kind of assess emerging talent when the guys who've broken through into the game over the past 4 years haven't been playing any limited overs, 50 over cricket? You know, these younger guys have hardly played the format at all. And so that's just not ideal, is it? I don't know how you kind of continue to grow or build or revolutionize the squad. And then with, you know, also how crammed the calendar has been in terms of international cricket, it feels like any time England have had an ODI series in the past couple of years, you know, there've been players rested and it's been like, let's just play a sort of B team and see how they go. And so, yeah, I do feel that there was complacency, a bit of muddled thinking coming into this tournament. I mean, I think that shows because England have already used every member of their squad. I think England and Sri Lanka are probably the only teams to have used 15 players in this tournament, right? But yeah, I feel that England did, yeah, as we said with Sri Lanka in 99, it was kind of like, let's just do what we did last time again, rinse and repeat that, and everything will be fine. But the players are 4 years older. The bowling is weaker, notably weaker without Jofra as their spearhead. And then in terms of the batting, I mean, Johnny Bairstow hasn't played a lot of ODI cricket in the last, you know, since his leg break. Stokes has just decided, you know, kind of last minute that I'm going to jump back into the side. Harry Brook is a hugely talented player, but we haven't seen him do it in ODI cricket yet. I don't think he's had a really notable 50 over innings yet. And then, I mean, my thinking coming into the tournament was that Ali and Livingston would be really kind of crucial cogs at 6 and 7 for this team, both in terms of the finishing and, you know, providing some spin bowling backup for Adil Rashid. But both of those guys have ended up dropped and out the side. And it looks like England don't really know what their game plan is at the moment.
Sorry, Mo, go ahead.
No, sorry. I just have to bring this up. I mean, this is a funny meme I saw online the other day. So I mean, it's an edit where there's a person rubbing their hands, and the face has been edited to have Andrew Strauss, and he's asking, guys, is it time for another high performance committee review? So, which I think, like, as funny as it is, I think it also like highlights the fact that, like, back in 2015 when they had this evolution, they had, I think, tremendous role clarity. Each player was assigned a specific role, and this is something like England have been like really great at. Even in T20s, I don't think they've like lost the plot by any stretch of the imagination. But like players like David Malan and Harry Brook, I think they have a definite role in this England setup. But I think they've been asked to do Harry Brook, I don't think has a lot of clarity on what he has to do within this setup. I don't know whether he knows when to accelerate and how to accelerate and where to target. Seems to be in a bit of a confusion. And David Malan, I think, is almost based at the top, even though he's batting really, really well. I think he's your number 3 or number 4 who scores 120 of 118 balls, 105 of 101 balls. So he's your like typical anchor, but anchor not in the 80 strike rate sense, but anchor in the sense of 95 to 105 strike rate sense. I think that's the modern anchor of the game. And I think like role clarity, I mean, if you mirror back into Sri Lanka, so role clarity is something we don't have to ever figure it out. So like the one of our pet peeves about the Sri Lankan limited over setup between Viren and I is we are firm believers that both Pathum Nissanka and Dhananjay De Silva are amazing talents, and they can be used with the right strategy, with the right players around them, with absolute clarity on what their role should be. But I think the way they are tasked right now and where they are slotted in the order and they've been asked to do things they are not equipped to do. And even at the top, I don't want Nissanka getting to 50 and feeling the pressure to accelerate and not having the strength to clear the infield and getting caught. That's not something you like to see. Nissanka should maybe occasionally he fails to catch up and he ends up with a strike rate of 75. But if he plays his natural game, I think he can more often than not score a runner ball 60, a runner ball 70, which is something we don't seem to do. Thoughts, Nick? I know I've been ranting.
No, I totally agree with you, Merle. And I think we've seen it a few times during this World Cup where Patham's built really nice 50s, and then you can see a kind of switch flicks in his brain where he's like, right, I've set a platform. Now I've got to go and try and play more shots. And it seems that as soon as he tries to go aerial, he ends up getting caught and getting out. I hope that we're not far away from a big one from him. But I think that the messaging should be just bat. And, if you score 85 off 100, it's not the end of the world for us. Look, I mean, it's hard to know what the best thing to do with this lineup is. And obviously, Kusal Mendes has been going fantastically at 3, and you're always loath to kind of switch something around that's been working really well. But he looks to me like he's enjoyed batting in the power play so much. And, it's the 2 innings that he's been really successful against South Africa and Pakistan. He came in early, right? And so I wonder whether it kind of makes sense. Do you want Kusal at the top with KJP and then Patham coming in at 3? I think the one thing, that's been great about this tournament and the Asia Cup before really is Sadira. And he seems really clear about his role. And I've said it on the Murali end that it's a shame that he's in this era where we don't play that much ODI cricket because it seems to be his best format by a long way. He just looks like a really natural kind of strike rotator, a guy who can score at a run a ball without taking risks or playing silly shots. And, his form has been a major boon for Sri Lanka, right?
And I want to bring up Sadira here. And I think he's been unfortunate. He was sidelined for a good 6 or 7 years. I'm pretty sure there was something going on behind the scenes with the selection committee, etc. But I want to kind of highlight Sadira's role in the side. And I think this is where I draw parallels with Mahela Jayawardene batting at number 4. I think it's been a while since we've had a very consistent number 4 batsman who can gradually accelerate and switch tempos and switch gears at ease. And Sadira has proven time and time again that he has the ability of doing that without frantically giving his wicket away when the need arises for us to increase momentum in the innings. And in terms of taking up this responsibility, even in our last game against Netherlands, it wasn't the easiest chase, but the way he kind of steadied the ship and made sure he saw it out was testament to his batting prowess and testament to his guile. And that's the type of responsibility I want to see being shared by the likes of Charita Solanke as well. Charita Solanke is a player that frustrates me no end. On his good day, he can be an absolute dynamite with the bat and sometimes play the role that the likes of Morgan, Yuvraj Singh played for England and India respectively and kind of provide that needed impetus in the middle overs. But with Charita Solanke being a tad out of form, with DDS being a tad out of form as well, and we'll get to these selection decisions later on, there's a lot of emphasis on Sadira and Kusal Mendes to flourish. And I agree with Anuradha here, and I agree with a few of our other viewers here that there are certain players that need to mature and take up some responsibility. Nick, I'm going to come to you, and this is a repeated question, so I'm going to highlight this. Your perspective on replacing Matthews for Matisha. If you don't mind me setting the context for this, right? We go in my opinion, with just one frontline seamer, and that's Dilshan Madhushankar. Kasun Rajitha has been good, but I think if you take a potent threat with the new ball, you think of Dilshan Madhushankar, and we saw what he did against Australia, saw what he did against Pakistan as well, when he dismissed both Imamul Haq and Babar Azam in that game. But wasn't this the prime opportunity to bring in someone like a Dushmanta Chamira? And my rationale behind it is I'm assuming he's fit. If he's fit enough to be a traveling reserve, I'm assuming he's fit enough to feature at some point in the campaign. And I'm going to draw parallels with England here. England have taken Jofra Archer as a travelling reserve. Sri Lanka took Dushmantha Chamira as a travelling reserve. Both sides have had injuries now, with Reece Topley being ruled out and Pathirana being ruled out. England going for Bryden Cass and Sri Lanka going for Angelo Matthews. Your rationale behind that decision, and do you think it's time that our selectors finally get it right?
Yeah, it's a really strange one, isn't it? Because you assume that Chamira is healthy or approaching full health if they're going to have him as a travelling reserve with the squad. And you think that if he's fit enough to play, it's a no-brainer that you bring him in, right? So it is a real head scratcher. I wonder, the messaging from England is that Archer wasn't fully fit, and they thought that the best way for him to kind of continue his rehab was to be around the squad, and that obviously hasn't worked out, and he's not at a place where he can get through 10 overs. I think the Bryden Cass thing makes sense in a way because, I've heard Mark Butcher complaining about this a lot on the Wisdom Pod, is that England took 3 left armers, Willie, Curran and Topley, who all want to take the new ball and who are all most effective up front, which is just really strange. So to bring in Cass, a guy who can, in theory at least, do well in the middle overs, makes some sense. Coming to Angelo, obviously he hasn't bowled a huge amount in the past 4-year cycle, and where we've seen him have success with the ball in the recent LPL was taking the new ball. But Rajitha and Dilshan have to be that new ball pairing, right? Because Rajitha can be effective up front, he can get swing, but he struggles in the middle and back end a lot more, and he can be a bit leaky in those periods. And Dilshan's been fantastic with the new ball up front, getting that swing coming into the right-handers. So, you wonder how Angelo fits into this side as a bowler. The kind of the sense I'm getting is that he might come in as a replacement for Chamika. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I thought that Chamika bowled pretty well against the Netherlands and looked like a good first change bowler, and I think it's quite a lot of pressure for Angelo if he's tasked with that role.
Well, do you want to go first and I'll follow you?
We are torn on this. Yes, Viren. So we were texting even during the game, and yes, like at some stretches of that Netherlands game, like he was quite good, but there were other stretches, especially towards the end, we couldn't quite figure out whether are we just getting the optics wrong because he's bowling at Netherlands is not a weak side, but not one of the top tier sides. And if we extrapolate that into an England game, would he get absolutely hammered by the likes of Josh Butler? So, Viren, care to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think the template has been set for a DDS masterclass with the ball on Thursday, right? You drop Chamika, you'd require DDS to bowl his full quota of 10 overs as our 5th bowler and replicate his brilliant performances in 2019. I'd like to do it on that front. But I want to kind of harp in and focus on Anuradha's question here. If Matthews has been brought in to steady the ship in our lower middle order, it goes back to our discussion on role fulfillment, right? We don't have a prolific number 6 or a number 7 batsman who can play the role of a finisher. I know Matthews did it during the early days of his career, going back to 2007, 2008, 2009, where he made his mark in the international arena. But I doubt he has that game anymore. And even in the LPL, Candy, Beloved Candy kind of used him as an upper middle order batsman who'd anchor the innings and then take the game on if he had settled in. And my worry here, Nick, is if we are to accommodate for Angelo Matthews, I'm assuming we are going to be a bowler short. Expect DDS to bowl his full quota of 10 overs. But at the Chinnaswamy Stadium, at a stadium where Wanindu Hasaranga has struggled to make a mark in playing for RCB, at a stadium where the likes of Yuzvendra Chahal and all the other RCB spinners, you take Adam Zampa into account, Yuzvendra Chahal going back when he was an RCB player. This is not a ground that's conducive for spinners. And someone like a DDS, who in my books is still a part-time spinner, might be taken to the cleaners by the likes of Butler, Brook, etc. Are you concerned about Sri Lanka's combinations looking ahead to the game on Thursday?
Yeah, I am. And I mean, I think us as fans don't have any real clarity about, as you said, Varun, like where Angelo's going to bat. Is he going to bowl? I think, if Thikshana's fit, then it's a big boost for Sri Lanka, right? And yeah, it's tough to know. I mean, is Dhananjaya going to go back to kind of like bowling those power play overs, coming in first change and sort of trying to sneak a few quiet ones in? I really like the way Mendes captained against Netherlands on Saturday, the way that he kind of kept his foot on the throat with 7 overs from Rajatha up front, and then he brought back Dilshan for his second spell quite early, and then had Thikshana, I think, bowling in those like around over 15, he came and settled straight into a long spell. And that felt like the kind of stage where Shanaka as captain might be like turning to himself and turning to DDS and thinking, let's just sneak a few quiet ones in. I liked the fact that Kusal went the other way and was just sort of the we're going to take wickets and we're going to keep taking wickets and we're going to put pressure on through the first 20 overs. But yeah, I don't know whether Angelo can play the finisher role. I mean, the game's changed and we haven't seen him as like a prolific boundary hitter in the LPL. I know these pitches will be easier to hit boundaries on than the Premadasa is. But yeah, I wonder, Charith's done so well at 5 that you would think that moving him would be a misstep. So you assume that if Angelo comes in, he'll bat 6 and DDS will go to 7. And then we will have, I've got no idea, right? Is it going to be Hamantha again, or is it going to be Walalage at 8? And then are we going to go, Thikshana if fit, and I guess Rajitha and Madhushankar. But it feels like, there are a lot of questions going into this game.
Based on this discussion, I'm going to propose something radical. So this is it factors in multiple things. One is the fact that Sri Lanka doesn't have a lot of low order hitting. 2, Chinnaswamy is a really small stadium with like easily clearable boundaries. And the third is Nick's previous point where Kusal seems to be really enjoying the power play. So I can already imagine Gus Atkinson and Mark Wood bowling at 145 and just like Kusal Mendes just pulling everything behind square for 6. So I'm just wondering, and I'm going to pose a question of this. I completely agree that we should probably, especially if we get to bat first, we should experiment with KJP and Kusal Mendes opening the batting. And my question is like, depending on how that goes, should we even? I get the point. Say, if we lose early wickets, then I can definitely see Pathum Nissanka coming in at 3. But if we get off to a really good start and we are, say, 130 for 1 after 14 or 15 overs, depending on the context and playing it by ear, should we even consider not sending Pathum Nissanka in if we are fairly settled and continuing with Charit Asalanka and Sadira Samaravikrama? I know it's a risky move, but bringing Nissanka in to a very a high tempo inning feels like it might disrupt things. I know this could be really controversial, but just based on almost the vibes and the tempo of the game, I can totally see a world if we get off to a good start. Asalanka and Samaravikrama might be able to better continue that momentum and build on it.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from, Merlin. I kind of like it in a way. I don't think they will, just because I think Pathum's gone well enough. Has he scored 50s in the last 2 games? And so I think he's done enough up front for them to keep faith with him. But I don't hate at all Kusal, KJP, Asalanka as a combustive top 3 to try and get runs early. Because, if you look across the tournament, I think Sri Lanka haven't scored a lot of runs in the last 20 overs at all, right? It's kind of like what you get in the first 30 is pretty much what you're going to end up with. And so I wonder if you think that you do a kind of reverse engineer and you send your finishers up front and then you get Pathum just to knock it around for the last bit of the innings. Hey, we need something revolutionary, right? But I do think that, we've talked about Sri Lanka's bowling potentially being problematic, but I think that England, I think their bowlers can travel. I think that it's going to be really important for Sri Lanka not to gift wickets to Rashid in the same way that they did to Zampa. And I think that if they can bat out those Rashid overs and, just tick him around and not let him pick up 2 or 3 wickets, then the rest of England's attack is kind of there for the taking, right? As you touched on, Merle, Atkinson and Wood are going to bowl fast. And so they're going to be dangerous, but there's going to be boundary options against them. And then, who's going to round out England's attack? Kars is another guy who, if he comes straight in, he hasn't played a lot of cricket in India before, and he bowls at a pretty high pace, so he could go around. And then you think they'll open with one of Willie or Curran, who, while they're good up front and they can get swinging with the new ball, once it gets into those middle overs, they're much more hittable. So, England have got real issues with the makeup of that attack, as far as I can see. And it's a good chance for Sri Lanka's batting to click. Because I think that's been the disappointing thing for us, right? Is that through every innings, there have been individuals who stood up and played really well, but we just haven't found that game yet where the whole lineup has grooved and put it together. And I think lower order batting is another part of that. You look at two sides who, sadly, we're kind of in the mix with, Afghanistan and Netherlands, who, Afghanistan in that game that they beat England, they got really important contributions right the way down to Rashid and Mujib. And, we've seen the Netherlands lower order and on a couple of occasions kind of dig them out of holes. And I think they bat right the way down to Van Beek at 9. Sri Lanka, you feel like at the moment, whatever score we've got on the board when we're 5 wickets down is kind of like what we're going to end up with, which is, it's a shame, and it shouldn't be that way, because especially, at schools cricket, people talk about Sri Lankan sides always batting to 11. It's something that always surprises like English school sides who come and tour there. So it would be nice if we could get a few contributions from down the order.
Very well said, Nick. And I want to highlight what you just said about Netherlands and Afghanistan having a tail that wags. We haven't had that in the recent past, nor have we had a middle order that wags now. And our optimal solution to that was to add in a 7th batsman to try and kind of fix those issues. And this is going to be a battle of the unknowns, in my opinion, right? We don't know what our final combination looks like, how our final combination will play out. England have a few boxes to tick themselves in terms of what their final combination is going to be. My final question to you, Nick, since we've given a lot of emphasis to Sri Lanka, is looking back to that South Africa-England game. It was quite uncharacteristic of Mott and Butler to make those wholesale set of changes ahead of that South African game. Do you see the likes of Curran and Livingston being back in the fray for the game against Sri Lanka on Thursday?
Yeah, I could. I could potentially even see Moeen Ali getting a game. I think that really, actually, England are pretty frazzled going into this one. Butler, I said this on the Murali pod yesterday, he's a cricketer who hasn't had a huge amount of adversity across his career. He kind of strolled into the captaincy and won a T20 World Cup, it seemed, by just sort of doing what England had done before. And suddenly he's under real pressure. He hasn't made a score with the bat. He made a decision at the toss, which was widely scrutinized and criticized. And, I actually thought again against Afghanistan that letting Afghanistan bat first was a kind of questionable decision. And that felt like a game where if England had batted first and scored, a decent total, Afghanistan would have kind of lost a bit of heart and been out of that game. So I thought they gave Afghanistan an in, letting them bat first. I don't know where England are going to go with their combination on this one. I think that they will expect to beat Sri Lanka, but I don't think it's going to be a walkover. And I see it as kind of close to a 50-50 game, right? Sri Lanka and England were facing similar situations against South Africa in terms of, looking up at a huge total. And Sri Lanka showed real fight, whereas England just totally wilted. And then, you look back at the Pakistan game, which Sri Lanka should have won, the Australia game where they were in a really good position. And maybe if they just had, 50 more runs on the board, could have put Australia under real pressure once, Smith got out. So I see this, as pretty much close to a 50-50 clash. And I think for both teams, it's a really, really huge game. I know that they're down towards the bottom of the table at the moment, but with the way this tournament's going, Three sides in India, New Zealand, and South Africa have really broken clear of the pack. And out of the rest, it seems a bit like everyone's beating everyone. And you wonder whether there might be a situation where 5 wins is enough to sneak you through into 4th spot and get into the semis. And I think whoever wins this game on Thursday will think we can still win 3 more matches out of our last 4 and have an opportunity of qualifying. And, it would be remarkable if Sri Lanka made it to the semis, and from the position they're in, it would be remarkable if England made it to the semis. But I don't think we can entirely rule out either side's chances just yet with the way this tournament's unfolding.
If Sri Lanka reach the semis, that will go down in cricketing folklore as one of the greatest ever runs, considering the start we've had, considering all the turmoil in the run-up to the World Cup. My final question to both Merle and Nick is, if you had to make one left field prediction or one wacky prediction looking ahead to Thursday's game, what would it be? I'll just get the ball rolling. My prediction is that the team that performs better or that performs best in both power plays will end up winning the game. I think there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the first 10 overs of the game, and depending on which side bats first and depending on the score they set up, the side first 10 overs was chasing as well. The reason I'm saying that is Nick referenced the South African game where England kind of wilted under pressure. That was caused by a top order collapse in the power play. And I think this is going to be a game of attrition, and Sri Lanka would have to force England to make a few unforced errors early on, using a tennis reference here, to get the better of England. Because on paper, England go into this game as outright favourites, but given the circumstances, given that this is a must-win game for both sides, and England have a lot more expectations in their camp than we do in ours, I think this is where we can capitalise. Merle, I'll come to you first and then wrap up the show with Nick.
I think mine is more of a hope than a prediction, and it's not even a left field prediction. But I think Kusal Mendis is going to fire again. I think even if he doesn't come at the very top, whoever is going to come at the top is going to get deceived by pace and perhaps some movement you might find early in the inning. And Kusal is going to come very early, and I think he's going to hit another 70 ball 130.
I like it. I should warn you guys that I have form with these predictions being horrible, and that whatever I predict, the opposite happens. So I'm almost scared to say this, but I'm going to stick to my guns. And my prediction is that Sri Lanka managed to take a couple of wickets in the power play, and that Dikshana comes on and has a spell where England play him all wrong, try and launch him out the park, and that he ends up taking a bag full of wickets and inspiring a little English collapse.
That would be brilliant, and that would be the perfect kind of game/template for Sri Lanka. Nick, thank you very much for joining us for this show. We hope that this is the first of many, and yes, if you haven't purchased an Island 11 yet, it is the must-have for all Sri Lankan cricket fans, and a must-read for all Sri Lankan cricket fans too. Nick, it's been an honor and a pleasure once again having you on board. Thank you. And it means a lot to us to have you on our channel. And we look forward to many more shows with you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And anytime, I'm always happy to come on. And thank you. Really looking forward to Thursday.
Thanks, Nick. And let's all have a repeat of Headingley in 2019 with that. Cheers.